maybe 12, 13 years ago, we were launching a SaaS startup for football for kids. So they have skill tracking for youth sports was our whole thing. It's like on an individual basis, if you're playing on a good team, maybe you're good, maybe you're not, because you're hiding among the other 11 players. So we built some skill tracking thing. We got it to about 30,000 athletes and coaches in maybe 2 years. But the launch event that we did, when we were broke and had only a little bit of funding, we went to the National Soccer Coaches Convention in the USA, which had maybe 5,000 coaches there. And the other brands that were exhibiting there were like Dick's Sporting Goods, Skillsies, really huge brands who are paying $50,000 for a booth, and they're over the top. And we're like, what are we going to do to stand out? And my co-founder had this idea. He looked at some pictures. Everybody's wearing dark Adidas clothes. So what if we wear a white shirt with bright green pants? Maybe we can stand out and have a lot of conversations that way. So we got the cheapest booth you could possibly have, and we wore green pants. And from the moment we walked in, it was like 10 feet into the room. Why are you wearing those green pants? It became this conversation starter, and we had 250 plus people sign up for our app at that, which was a really good number for how many conversations we had. And so green pants is like a symbol now for us of doing something scrappy to get attention, being really creative with resources to get something done. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, they're upside down for another reason, which is why are they upside down? So I actually have a book called Upside Down Debate from a different segment of life. I'm a speech and debate coach in high school. And the idea of upside down values are that when I coach debate, a lot of people think debate is about fighting and conquering and dominating an opponent. But I actually coach an upside down approach, which is that actually debate is about serving decision makers to make good decisions and creating value. And so from that world too, in some of the business world, I've tried to adopt approaches to things like sales or product development that always put the customer first and value first. And so we sort of call that upside down. So the upside down pants are about that. So funny little meanings in this stuff. Thank you.
So you're going to start now?
Sure.
I think the battery is 2025. I'm excited to introduce a speaker who is not just a founder, but a true turnaround specialist with an extraordinary track record. Please join me welcoming Isaiah McPeak, a 5X founder, multi-time turnaround specialist, and the leader of a Dhaka-based team. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a discussion that I'd like to warm us up with, which is what are some of the things, if Agile is happening at a organization, they really believe they're doing Scrum, but actually it's sick. It's the cancerous version of that. How does that show up? I want to get some like realistic pictures because we talk a lot about ideals and theories in these sorts of conferences, but how do you know when somebody's trying to do all those ideals and theories, but it's still going wrong? What are a couple of things that might look like? And I can get us started to give you some examples. I was just writing some down myself. One of them is project management language instead of product management language. Shows up. That's a sick Scrum culture, right? We're doing Scrum, but all the words are handoff, requirement, timeline, right? What are some other things that you might notice or see when Scrum is sick inside of an organization? Anyone? Us and them situations, especially between departments, right? QA and devs are at war for whatever reason. Good, I think that's very true. There's a deadline before you know what the scope is, right? That's really caused by CEOs a lot of times too, right? They have no idea how software development process works, and so they're like, it has to be this is the amount of money, and then over here we're doing Scrum, trying to create value with unpredictable, ambiguous situations, but that's not how our organization is thinking or speaking. Yeah, that's really good. Who else? Sick Scrum. Has anyone ever had to change course mid-sprint? Yeah. If that happens all the time, it's probably something's wrong, right? So a couple others that I wrote down that I thought would be fun that have to do with this case study that I want to share today are vanity metrics that have operations leading instead of customer value leading. And an example might be, we have 500 automated tests. I heard that. We have 500 automated tests. Okay, great. What are they testing? QA director doesn't know. First QA person doesn't really know. I go and look at it as a product manager, like, but these aren't the things that our product does in the first place, half of them, and they're definitely not the things that the customer finds valuable. And by the time I got my eyeballs on them, we found it was better to just delete all 500 and start over. But that was their world. QA was like, we create automated tests, so we're going to create a lot of them, and we're going to brag about it and puff out our chests. That's a vanity metric to me. Another one is all voices being equal. To me, this is actually a sick version of Scrum, and here's why. If you have one person who's done this kind of thing for 15 years and launched a bunch of products before, and you have another person who hasn't even, let's say, read the Scrum manual, but they're both on the same team, and we're told, you need to have everybody ideating, everybody innovating, what happens is the person with the experience is in the awkward situation of they don't know how to collaborate in this situation without being like mean. And so you're set up to have every voice equal, but that's actually going to lead to a lot of extra paperwork and bad decisions. And speaking of extra paperwork, that's my last one that I want to leave on this topic of when Agile is sick, we spend more of our daily lives writing essays to each other in Confluence than actually coding something or interacting with customers. Has anyone lived in an essays environment for product before? Do you know what I'm talking about? It means that every product manager has to write 150 acceptance criteria. It means that the background for everything, the documentation for everything, is because it's being handed off, that the documentation can't just be the whiteboard for the team, which it often can be. So proliferation of documents, to me, is a sign of sickness of Scrum. There's a principle of Scrum, one of the 5 is actually courage, that I think is undercovered. And so today, in this case study, I want to just tell you from the boots on the ground mess of actually doing Scrum, what might it look like to give you some tools that you might use in your really human organizations where half the people there are applying Scrum poorly and half the other people don't even know what it was in the first place. How might you really communicate? So what you'll see here is every slide that I have is from about a year and a half of running a change management situation. These are all unadulterated slides, so I haven't made them better for this. These are the exact slides that were used in meetings with executives, in meetings with venture capitalists, and in meetings with the team to create a change. We're not going to get to all of them, but it's not that kind of a presentation. It's more of like, here's this tool, here's that tool, and I want you to jump in if you find something very useful that you'd like to explore more, or want to know how would you do it a different way. Get involved in the conversation, okay? All right, so here are the results at the end of the most intense part of the change management period. Okay, this is exact metrics we were using. This is the exact slide used to present what happened because we took a big risk at the organization and we cut costs from about $250K a month spend, which is roughly 30 USA developers. We cut that by 31%. That means I let go of a bunch of people. A bunch of people got fired. We streamlined responsibility is what that really is about. If there's 2 people who I could name that are responsible for one thing, then nobody's responsible for one thing, is kind of my theory. So we changed that a little bit. And over the course of this period, bugs per month went from 37 to 5. The cycle time, meaning the time from the date the issue was sent to development to the day that it was completed, went from 6 months to about 5 days. Bug time resolution went from 47 days to 2 days. Predictability, this one's interesting. So we'll talk more about predictability. Okay, so we went from 1 month behind on 20% of the work and failing to deliver the other 80%, which means like this. So here's our sprint. It's green, it's green, it's green, it's green, it's green, it's green, it's green. It's the last day, it's red. And then we only deliver 20% of the sprint. That's what this is about. To sprints that actually delivered the milestones that were predicted, and we got to a 100% success rate. Very important for me on how to do that. Staff happiness, this is a really simple survey. Really simple survey. It was like, how much do you enjoy this job? And we saw a huge increase in joy levels over some of the techniques that I'm going to show you here. Story point velocity that we tracked, we had in 20 weeks, there were 1,500 story points done before. And then in 7 weeks, we did 930. So the average went from 76 points a week to 133 points per week. Finally, one that always kills me as a product manager is how much of the time are we reworking something? And we went from 24% rework to 0% rework over the 6 months that this particular measurement was taken, okay? So these are the results of some very real fighting in the bushes product stuff. Here's the history of how we got to where this, this case study finds us. So the case study that I'm discussing is really from right here on, but the company that needed a turnaround where I became the product manager who did that had a long past that I think is pretty familiar for those of us who have done any early stage work in product. And sometimes if we're launching a new product or new initiative inside of a larger enterprise, which is you have a lot of excitement here. This is Corey and Barry. Barry's the CTO. Corey is kind of like the product manager, product owner at that time. They are, they've seen an opportunity for board management software, which is what this is about. So helping boards like a Mensa board, a school board, make decisions and track strategies. They get really close to launching, don't quite, they don't hit the timelines they predicted, so the incubator that they're in called Carnegie Technologies, CT, operations department who have professionals in Scrum and Agile take over from these guys, and the product fails, they completely change direction, they try to go a different way, nothing quite works, so this guy, Graham, who's a subject matter expert, starts shaking the tree. He's part of one of the investors, and he says, we've got to get these guys back involved. So they get Barry back in charge again, and it's going on course, this product. They add developers, but then it doesn't launch, it doesn't release. So CT Ops takes over again and demotes the guy, Barry, from CTO down to junior developer, which was an interesting move to make. And they started working on processes. So I came in about right here, and I want to tell you, my first 3 weeks at this place, Carnegie Technologies, we redid the customer success process like a lucid chart flow diagram. The customer success process no fewer than 13 times in 3 weeks. And that meant 5+ senior leaders sitting in a room defining and debating what should customer success really be. I stopped going to that meeting and I was called an asshole. That's what the word they used, so I'm saying it here. I just said, I'm not going to these meetings anymore. And the owner of the whole place was okay with it because of my reasoning, which is, how can you redefine a customer success process 13 times before you have any customers? Something's a little backwards about that, isn't it? So imagine that happening at scale in every department and in every area. That's how you got to 500+ automated QA tests. There's not even one customer yet. We're asking all the wrong questions and providing the right solutions to them at completely the wrong time, which is the sign of a sick Scrum bureaucracy. So by this point, they had lost around $3.5 million and don't even have a product to market. So I came in as the product manager, and after a few weeks, said, actually, this product, as far as I can tell, is about 10 products. We're just going to pick one piece of it that seems closest to release and release that and sell that and actually start making money. We can build the other 9 things some other time. This made a lot of people angry because they've been working on this for 2.5 years, and it was their baby. A lot of engineers' babies were in here. I just said feature flag, hide. Let's find this shortest possible thing, and I'm giving us 6 weeks, and then we're going to launch this. We're going to push the release button. And whatever it is, that will be our minimum viable product. Whatever it is. And that is what we're going to start to sell. That is where the rest of the stuff comes in, but yeah, I'll just show you some of these things. The up to the right piece after this is we actually built a proper operation. And I'm really proud of that because the company went from not having any revenue at all to within just 1 year, the whole company was profitable after the launch. We were able to make 51 sales to school boards over the next 1 year, and the thing worked. And we never built the other 9 items that were kind of on the truck, as it were. We just doubled down on the one that we actually got to market, which makes sense. All of us should say that makes sense. So internally, when I presented this to ownership, I used this slide to say, here's how we did it, because this was just one of 10 companies inside the Carnegie Technologies Group, and the other 9 companies had all also been around for 2.5 years and all also not launched, even though they have a complete Scrum and Agile framework. They have Scrum coaches, they have Scrum masters. There's a 350-person organization with all the right things, and we were the only product to launch within about a 3-year period. And so in the slide that I presented to ownership when they asked, I said, well, it's pretty straightforward what we did. First, we got faster by creating smaller teams and fragmenting work. We found a way to release, and we found a way to release weekly, which is a hill that I died on because that was something that we needed there. A weekly release is not always the healthiest thing. But sometimes if you have people who have been lost in their heads for 2 or 3 years, you need to start creating a feeling of momentum. And that's typically done by saying, there's a release train, it's going out this day, get something on it. And with quality, we did some really classic software stuff, transitioning mostly to customer-centric needs instead of technical-centric needs. Really basic stuff, but an Agile Scrum organization had failed to do that, is kind of the point. And we want to keep our companies from getting sick in the same way. The last piece is I talked a bit about people, where we shifted to a people management approach based on strengths and unlocking people to leverage their strengths towards goals instead of a bunch of other stuff, which I'll show you in a second, that basically is tasks. For me, this is powered in brain science, which is we're trying to switch developers into flow state. That's the whole goal of a lot of these processes, is if we can get those who are actually working on problem solving and doing the work to lose track of time, then they're more likely to solve the problem all the way through. But to do that, you have to equip them with a bigger vision, and you have to protect their creative time boxes so that they have lots of free space to do that sort of creativity, and you have to reward them for it. Because there's nothing more bureaucratic than the people who aren't achieving goals get rewards, and there are people who are achieving goals aren't being rewarded, which is what happens when Agile gets sick. The best things, we all know this, the best things are going on below the Agile radar. Everybody else is doing the ceremonies, and then 1 or 2 people are the effective people, and they're not even doing that, right? That's what happens. How do you flip that around? That's a very bureaucratic situation. So this is what we said we did. Douglas Adams says, I love deadlines, the whooshing sound they make as they fly by. It's good stuff. Here's the story of how it went wrong and how it could be. So here's the imagine if. I'm going to read some of this to you. And again, this is a real slide actually presented to both management and then the whole team. Imagine if Barry, who's the tech lead, CTO, Isaiah, who's the product manager, and Michelle, who's the designer, 3 key people, sat in a room for just 2 days and figured out this feature called accountability. We sat in a room, figured out accountability is design. It's not very intuitive right now. So what did we do together? Well, we identified jobs to be done that the planner component that accountability features inside of was hired for. We built some lucid charts workflows for the most efficient path to get each of those customer jobs to be done in. We did a gap analysis on our current state of the product versus the ideal. We went page by page and object by object to create a very sensible flow for this experience. Then the CTO, Barry, selected some technology while Michelle, the designer, configured some designs, while Isaiah, the product manager, confirmed with customers our working theories of how this particular feature set is going to be the most valuable. And for me, that's picking up the phone in an afternoon, not scheduling a bunch of meetings. I'm just going to like harass people, right? So then CTO builds it, Michelle adds color flare, and a few days later, the redesign path is obvious and it's very likely to work. We start prototyping it and we run it by customers the next day. A few days to get some valuable results. Now, of course, that's not even close to what actually was happening. Here's what actually was happening. Just Isaiah, the product manager, alone has to audit the entire platform and identify the needs to be certain that something is a priority for a 6-week spend. Then Thomas, the other designer, by himself would redo all of that work that the product manager did because he's got to do his own UX research process and make up his own determination of what makes sense, and then submits designs for review. Then we have these 4 meetings. Isaiah submits changes to his designs, Thomas goes and redesigns and then submits changes back. Then Isaiah takes to customers and validates the design. So this is very fragmented. It's happening, it's the right work, but the way it's happening is really messed up. Because then the tech review comes back and looks at the design and says, well, we're going to need very different technical implementation due to architecture constraints. But they're coming in and saying that after we've already validated with the customer a redesign that we've already actually done. Uh-oh, that's a lot of waste. So then we go back and we redesign again, trigger the process again, more design, both of us, the product manager and the designer separately. Then we'd recheck with customers, and then we'd resubmit for approval with the tech team. Eventually, we'd break this down into tickets, slot for some sprints, and then we'd spend a week writing acceptance criteria because the particular tech person there was very risk averse and never wanted to be wrong and wanted to not be able to be blamed for anything. So I eventually embraced this, that my job as product manager is to be a product lawyer, and I'm the attorney inside of our ticket system, and I will define every single edge case, and I will define that when you hit the save button, dang it, the thing in the field is saved to the database. I will define that for you, engineers, because you're demanding that, okay? So we do acceptance criteria for every single detail, so our highly paid engineers can just follow instructions. Several weeks later, our first version's out, and then we find out we were doing something wrong because the customers are actually using this for the first time, weeks and weeks and weeks after we need this, and we have to go make some adjustments and refinements, and we trigger the whole process again. And all of that happens with back and forth calendar syncing and scheduling, because anytime any of these people need to talk to each other, somebody has to schedule a meeting, and oh, they're busy the next day, and so you have to schedule it for Thursday just to have a 30-minute discussion. Does any of that sound familiar to any of you? You ever been anything like that? It's miserable, absolutely miserable. But this masquerades as Scrum and Agile. It's wearing that mask. The focus here, so Marty Kagan's book, Inspired, talks about the same thing other speakers have already talked about all the way at the top, UX, business case, down, down, down. This is really, I learned from the Prezi product manager the phrase water scrum fall, and I'm sort of stuck with that. This is the water scrum fall, where at each point on this journey, you can kick it back multiple steps up, and then it goes back through. And actually, waterfall would be preferable to that, because then at least your plan would have been right the whole time, and it's not going to be kicked back 100 times. So the water scrum fall root issue is that executives want to be able to predict when something will be released. But this is the very first point from you all over here. You can't predict when something will be released if you don't know what it is yet. And that's the war that executives and technology teams have with each other. Here, tell me how many minutes of coding this will take. I don't even know which approach we're going to use yet. How can I tell you how many minutes of coding this will take, right? So you have to remove time from the equation a little bit with executives and management if you're going to succeed at challenging the framework that they're used to. But they come by it honestly. Somebody asked a question in the last session, the difference between project and product. And this slide is what we used as our Bible with the tech team. We all printed this out. We're going to shift from project words and start using product words. And these are all one for one. So requirements becomes customer challenges. Estimates become commitments all the way down. So does anybody have any questions or thoughts about this slide actually while it's up here? The point I want to make to all of you is that none of this is right or wrong, right? I'm squarely in the middle of mess when it comes to Scrum and Agile. I'm not at all in of any particular theory, because theory has to meet practice. But one of our jobs, if we want to actually succeed, is we might have to sell and educate a lot inside of our organization. And these are some of the sales tools that I actually successfully used to convince our executives that we're not going to talk in terms of estimates, requirements, or time tracking anymore. We're not going to even track an engineer by the hour. That is, I die on that hill every time. I do not track engineers by the hour because that's not the kind of work they're doing. That's like tracking an artist by the hour. Like, well, they have to come up with their thing. It's not just, it's a creative 21st century information age job. And we have to look at the commitment and the goal, not the time. We can do that for moving dirt, or something like that, which is great project. We're going to move dirt. Well, you need twice as much dirt moved, twice as many people. The opposite is true in software. So here's some phrases that I have grown allergic to that I help other product managers also. If you hear any of these phrases, you might want to just kill them. Like, that's a stop, full stop. We don't use that word handoff, because handoff means I am no longer taking responsibility. That's what it means. The problem with the handoff model inside of software development is that nobody ultimately is responsible. Is the word probably viable? Yes, but in a culture that uses it, I'm going to ban that phrase all the time, every time. No, we don't think that way. And turn it over to QA is the other one that drives me bananas. As if QA are the ones who ultimately know the most about who the customer is, what they need, and how they interact. That's not fair to any QA person that's out there. And so that's another one that I really look at. And then finally, the documentation. Not that there's something totally wrong with a PRD or an MRD, but if you're in a sick Scrum culture, there probably is. All things documentation, you probably need to take a few steps back and just use a whiteboard for a minute. And you can build back a healthy sense of documentation. This was both to the team and to the executives, which is the problem with the way work is being handled today is developers are given tasks that some genius up on high is giving them. But the person who's giving them tasks doesn't know how to do development tasks in the first place. In any, if you were doing textiles or something like that, usually the person who is instructing somebody on the factory floor to do this or that stitch or action has done that before. But in software, we have this bizarre situation where the business people and product management people, if you do Scrum wrong, are expected to write engineering tasks for them. That's really bizarre. That's almost a guaranteed path to fail. And so the product manager needs to actually help expand the view of everyone and say, tasks are something you're going to come up with on your own, engineers, because you're tied into the motivating objectives and vision of the organization. And if I'm selling the product vision well and the company's vision well, you're going to be able to create a far sharper view of what the tasks should be, and you're going to be able to adapt those on the fly. And that's what we have to enable in our organization. So here's some actual study stuff that, again, I used internally to show the importance of a joy-fueled engineering force. Going back to your point about anger and fighting, that's what this culture had, is everybody blaming the other person constantly. And what's interesting is like the pathological power-oriented, I think, is less interesting here, but Scrum, when it's sick, is the bureaucratic, rule-oriented. And that showed up in this world where you've got a product manager, the other product manager, who's like, we do the Scrum ceremonies. This is the day we do this one. This is the day we do that one. This is the day we do this one. Oh, we're out of time. We can't do any more grooming today. Guess we'll have to do that next week. Like very rigid about following the Scrum methodology. So they could never be blamed. They're doing the product management job correctly. That's kind of what this is in the middle. Moving to generative, generative means that individual brains on the team come up with their own ideas that one brain at the top did not necessarily come up with. How can you activate all 30 brains on your team to be going the same direction you're going instead of one person being the bottleneck brain? That creates productivity, but this is cultural inside your organization. It flows through language, process, compensation, and the reward system that you build. Okay, so moving to how did we change from departments to product teams? I think if you were here for the opening talk yesterday about wholeness, we were the left-hand side components team. So I would say we didn't achieve full wholeness here in this model. This is probably the right step in that direction because we went from departments to not departments. So we created the product leadership team and then spun up product delivery teams on the fly. For the first bit, instead of product delivery teams being spun up on the fly based on the initiative, we would spin them up on the fly based on time. We did it per quarter. We just made a few teams, stuck with that for a quarter, then switched teams the next quarter as we started to learn this process and then improved it from there. So the product manager in this world has a higher expectation than a mere empty-brained process follower. The product manager here has to be the CEO of the product. They have to be responsible for the ultimate outcome, which means they have to speak the language of every stakeholder, every single one. And if they're not speaking the language of every stakeholder and colliding those languages together, then they're ultimately just a paper pusher. And we don't need any more paper pushers. We don't need any more ticket pushers. And a lot of poor product management just boils down to that. I'm not going to think about what the product actually is. I'm just going to do ceremonies. Absolutely doesn't work. But this person can fuel quite a few delivery teams when done right. And that was shocking to the organization. I pulled this out from Creativity Inc. at this time because we also had a lot of hierarchy issues going on. And we had some of that whole, why did you talk to him? You should have talked to me first stuff. And so we came out with a blanket rule. Anybody can talk to anyone else at any time for any reason without fear of reprimand, period. We're going to do it that way. What's interesting about the backstory here, though, is that Ed Catmull kind of made this in opposition to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a huge backer of Pixar and used to come down to the office and created a really challenging culture for the creativity of the studio that makes movies like Toy Story. Ultimately, Ed Catmull kicked Steve Jobs out. The point that I'm making is that both of them are viable CEOs of extremely powerful and effective businesses that create things with very different philosophies. We needed to choose this one at this time. But at another time, you might need to choose a different one. I'm going to skip this. It's simple enough. Okay, good. So here's how this looked in actual practice the very first quarter we tried it. The very first quarter, we did our org chart. We had a PLT, and we've got me as the product manager, and then I hired an associate product manager who was a former project manager, and she's now the head product manager for Blizzard Entertainment, which is a pretty big deal. But this was her first product manager role, and we fueled 4 delivery teams. And on these 4 delivery teams, each one of them has a mix of, all of them have developers. You can't really see the titles on the screen, it's a little blurry. All of them have developers, some of them have designers. That was the first way we did it. So not everyone had a product manager. That was sort of coming from the PLT. As this grew over time and our model succeeded, we started transitioning product managers into the specific teams and giving them full range of responsibility over some subject. So this is the start of change management, but not the end of it. Is this like trying to call from the internet right now? Well, what this was going to be is this is a spreadsheet showing Myers-Briggs and DISC profiles that I did on every team member. And so we just did some of that for fun to get to know each other. I also did this, I'll tell you about the craziest thing we did with this team. It is in the same self-discovery, like woo-woo stuff that you do as a company. We had this art lady come in, and she had our team all sit around with paint, and we all had to paint a painting. But it wasn't like a painting of a thing, like a flower or a truck or whatever. She said, all right, first choose a color that you think matches your core identity. Now, I want you to put it on in a motion that matches your primary energy style. And she kept adding and adding and adding things, and then we all had this like really art at the end of it that all of us were embarrassed about. It was just like texture and stuff. But then you passed it to the next person, and they explained what they saw about you or in you from it. It was one of the best woo-woo things I think I've ever done. It was really cool because you were able to see who was very minimalist in their thinking and who was extremely multidimensional, and a lot about that. And so imagine that kind of thing in Myers-Briggs and DISC discussions. We had a lot of personal discussions to know each other's strengths and weaknesses so that we didn't think a developer is a developer is a developer or a designer is a designer. No, this is this particular developer, and they happen to be better at this kind of problem solving or that kind of communication, and we're going to keep the human side of the equation in here instead of treating people like they're just rows on a spreadsheet. So this also is another spreadsheet from that. I guess it's trying to load live right now, but the end point here is that wow. Guys, can you check if there's any way to get some of this to load? I might come back to it. I'll take a random question while they're tinkering with my slides. Yeah, just give it a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. So there was a slide where it was showing that you had weekly releases. So how long did it go? Because in my experience, it can happen, but it can only happen for a very short time.
Mm-hmm.
And it really takes a very high-performing team or something to push them or motivate them.
Yeah.
So how did it go, and how were able to achieve it, and the duration for that? Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So we achieved weekly release cycle by having a release train model. If you go back to that org chart that you saw where I had the 4 delivery teams, not all 4 delivery teams have something each week. Each week there's just a release. Sometimes that release is small, sometimes it's large. But that was what created the motivation and a little bit of competition between the teams of like, I always want to have something on the release train. So I agree with you, it's incredibly hard to pull off. The environment that I was in is they hadn't released at all in 2.5 years. So even with that suicide market launch, guess how long the first release took?
You already said it first one took around 2 years.
From the day that we said the software is done and here's our first version to actually being on production server live, how long do you think that was? So this is like, we're about to release, it's gonna be done. It's done. How much longer?
I think around 5 months.
You're pretty close, yeah. It was 4 months. It took 4 months to release because they had lost the muscle of releasing. So that was why I would go very strict. Most of my other teams right now will do a 2-week or a 6-week process, but it's the concept of the train that it's gonna leave the station, and if it's empty, we're all gonna have frowny faces, and we're gonna own that accountability, and the product manager kind of motivating and saying, okay, is this what's at risk or not at risk of being on the release train? Let's make sure you don't show up empty-handed. That's been part of what makes it happen.
Your slide is there.
Oh, thank you. Wow, it's a lot clearer now too. I appreciate it. Thank you all. Okay. There you go. So this to me is like a good example of drop dead simple, right? There's actual work performance softwares that handle this sort of thing that you can pay some money for and probably do it a lot better. But for me, sometimes the simplest tool is the right tool. And this was just a spreadsheet where we did dot grids for the main skills of product and then some personality stuff so that we end up with, in the USA, we would call these baseball cards. So they're like a little card that's a stat sheet of somebody, and maybe there's a picture on the front and some stats on the back for each person. And then when the initiative planning happened on what are our big epics, we would do the exact same thing, which is the same exact words and categories, what level is required. So, for information architecture feature, whatever that is, we said that requires super seniority in UX. This is a big UX challenge. Whereas these live issues over here, the super seniority that's required is in the back-end development section. So as we look at these initiatives, that allowed us to make sure, going back to the teams, because we got the baseball cards of the team players, we can very easily, that's why I liked the simple framework, just be like, oh, that team does not have the skill sets necessary to achieve this initiative. Let's give it to a team who does. So then this is how we looked at planning a next quarter while the last quarter was still finishing using that same approach. So here are 4 teams, and then here's scope that we're looking at doing and kind of breaking the scope epics into different ones of these teams. So this was a big negotiation with different people assigned ultimately at the bottom. And this probably took, I'd say, 3 weeks of chipping away at very slowly across all stakeholders to lock in on a plan for the next quarter. And it looked this simple. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to do 2 more, and then can you time check me, actually? Yeah, I need to finish up? Yeah. So this is how I was able to communicate inside the organization how release is going to happen. The key part here is that there's 3 sections, and a lot of people think of product as 2. So all that I needed my executives to understand is that we've got objectives as a business up there, but there's a strategy period that has to happen between the objective and actual work getting done. That's called discovery. We called it discovery. Giving something a name so that you can say we're in discovery. That's in discovery. And educating about that word again and again was a really helpful way to get the executives to be patient with us. And then the fact that we're releasing every week and sending a release note also helped the executives continue to be patient with us of like, oh, wow, they're actually getting work done. Oh, they actually got something else done. It's very exciting to get, even if the overall thing isn't maybe every requirement or timeline matching your expectation. So this diagram, for whatever reason, sold internally really well to set expectations at all levels. Okay, and this is the last one I want to show. Let me see if another one loads more cleanly. No, it doesn't. All right, this is it. So the last thing is I had to create some very simple processes like how to report a bug, or in this case, how to change a priority, and educate and teach team members how to do these sorts of things, which is if you see a priority that needs changing, how do you bring it up, and what will happen to close the loop on that? And we had to actually create very simple types of processes so that people could feel safe to express or communicate or feel like there was like a non-bureaucratic way that we were operating to do this. So I had to do a lot of this. And to me, summarizing all of this, zooming out, the sickness of the Scrum world is addressed by doing simple communication, doing a lot of selling, and focusing on the courage that it takes to empower people to directly connect with objectives and goals instead of hiding behind the paperwork that Scrum and Agile can accidentally infect your organization with. Any questions or thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. All right, his question was the slide where I said lock a team and go as the product way. Was I literally saying that? And here is the slide. Yes, I was literally saying that, and we literally redid the office so that in the office, the team would have developer, designer, product manager, instead of the way it was before, which is QA over here, engineers over here, and product management over there. We physically matched. Lock the team in a room. Here's your objectives. Go do your thing. Yeah. Anyone else? I couldn't hear you. Go again.
In case of shared resources,
Yeah.
how can we manage this thing? Or we never plan something with the shared resources?
In case of shared resources, how do we manage this? I started, this one had QA was a shared resource, and some of design was a shared resource. I had to fight. And let me tell you how it went with the QA one, okay? So it was because of those metrics on the very first slide. And that was part of my fight, is I just started exposing to the organization, we have a 24% rework rate right now. We have 47 open bugs that have been open for more than 6 months, and it's not even live. Get out of town. So I had this interaction where I said, I just want my own QA person. You have 6 QA people in shared resources. I would just like one myself. I will be fine. And I was walking across the building, and the director of QA comes and walks in front of my face, and he's like an older, crotchety old engineer, probably 60 years old. And we had this encounter. He said, "What's this I hear about you saying nobody's responsible for QA of your product?" And I said, "Well, what's the name of the person who feels responsible for the quality of our product?" And he did this. I see what you're saying. And I got my QA person. So that's part of the point here, is all of this was like selling and fighting and arguing for a better way with people who are more experienced and educated in Agile and Scrum, but doing it wrong. And I think my argument to you is that you can do it, right? And that's part of what this session is but you have to. You have to turn a no into a yes and go sell some people. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra, for your valuable session.